Hey friend, in this video, we are completing our 4-part series on painting a really detailed watercolor peony, similar to the one that's on the cover of my second book, Everyday Watercolor Flowers. And painting something in this style or sketching something in this style can be very intimidating, especially if you've never approached more detailed subjects like this one. But I've been able to break down the process very simply so that you can approach it in a more simplified way that helps you address each individual petal one by one so you don't get too overwhelmed. So if you haven't already caught the first 3 parts of this series where I teach you all the sketching techniques you need to know, basic shapes and all of that in the base layers, make sure you go check out those videos. But if you're ready to finish up this piece and wrap this up for the 4th part, then let's dive in. All right, so in this video, we are completing this fluffy peony watercolor painting. We started in video 1, we started with understanding the 5 main shapes of petals and how to add detail and contour to them. And then I showed you how to add the detail to the actual petal shape with all the veins and the actual shadows. And then we started with the main sketch of our flower and the wet and wet detail stage. And now we're completing this 4-part series to add in our wet and dry details and make this flower really pop. I'm also probably gonna add some leaves or maybe more dark details around the edge of the flower in the wet and wet stuff. So we'll see where this goes. I don't have anything planned out at this stage. It's all from imagination, with obviously the goal in mind of doing something similar to this. But because I know what the basic shapes of this flower is and the 5 main shapes of petals and all of that, like I taught in the previous videos, I know how to form a flower from scratch. So in this stage, we're getting a little bit more detailed. So I'm going to be using a smaller brush, a size 2 round brush and size 6 round brush. I might also need a bigger brush for doing more of my background details too. After we add in the details of the flower, obviously we're gonna put a leaf right there. I don't know what this is, but it just made a mark on my paper. So we're just gonna put a leaf there. But I'm gonna start with starting to really define the edges of all of these little petals in the center of this main funnel part of the flower first. And then as you go along and start to expand out on the flower, it becomes a lot easier. You get into your flow. In the beginning, it can feel a little bit clunky and overwhelming, but treat every single petal like its own individual painting. And so all we're gonna do at this stage is lay down our dark concentrated color, our shadow color, and then blend it up the petal with water. So I'm gonna grab a thicker, buttery, more like creamy consistency of my color to start with my size 2 brush, and I'm just using quinacridone red with some permanent orange as my corally color mixture. And then I also have a purple color that I've been using with quinacridone red and a little bit of blue, Prussian blue, for just some variety in my hues, because light would hit certain areas of these flowers and bounce and reflect different colors. And so we don't want the same hue for every single petal on this flower. So I'm gonna go up in here first and define this petal right here where we have this top edge. You might not be able to see where I'm placing this color, but I'm placing it directly on top of my sketch. So we're accentuating that and defining that petal. And then I'm just gonna bring this shadow color across up in here. And then I'll release all of that color, dry it off a little bit, and just massage that color up into the rest of the petal. And as I keep massaging my way up, I want it to diffuse even more. So as I get closer to the edge of this petal, it's gonna be almost transparent and white almost, or whatever the background is. And then as I'm making my way across, I need to define the edge of this petal a little bit more. So I'll drop in some of that dark color again, or maybe some of that purple mixed in with it to add a little bit of a variety in shadow color. And I'll just paint in a thin section of that shadow. Grab water, dry it off a little bit, massage it up. Maybe add in a little bit more texture to my petals. Massage that up so we don't have any of those hard lines. We're just taking the color and lightening it gradually so that it just fades into the background. So already this is making the flower pop and become more detailed looking. Maybe I'll go back to my more pinky hue on this side. Just carving out those petals for that separation. Going up on that edge, softening it, and blending it with the background. Really deep down in here where it's going further down into the flower. And then we'll stop on that edge right there because that starts a new petal. And color this in a little bit more for more shadow. And then get rid of the color, dry it off a little bit, and soften that top edge. And I'll always make sure to leave a little gap of basically white space where my next pencil line is, where the end of the petal is, because we're going to cover up this pencil line right here with dark color over there for that petal. So I'll do that right now since it's not going to touch. And I'll separate this petal. And come alongside this edge too, where there's another petal curling over. Grab my water, blend it up. So still a wet on wet process, but with pigment instead of that wet glaze of water that we did and then plugging in color, lighter color. We're basically doing little mini wet and wet paintings for each individual petal to show that separation. So once I block in my shadow color, grabbing that clean water, or mostly clean water, and diffusing that edge, softening that edge and blending it up, grabbing water here and there as I keep inching upwards to make sure that the color fades. And I'll start to come around this side too. Okay. And now I don't want to go over to this petal right next to this one because this is still wet. So they'll just kind of blur the shadows together. So I'm going to skip over that one for now and go, let's darken this sky. And just placing in my shadow color, grabbing water. Not too much water because it'll cause cauliflowers. Blend it up. Let's go along here. Add my shadow color. Accentuate the curve of the bit. Grab my water. diffuse. Same thing on this one. Accentuate the butt shape. Grab your water. This is also being overlapped by the petal over here, so we want a dark color on that edge. As well. So it's a really fun process. Very therapeutic once you get into your groove and you find the technique that works best for you. I like to add my dark color and drag it up, but sometimes people like to put water down first, add their dark color and diffuse it that way. So it's really kind of artist to artist what your preferences are. I'm gonna go back in here and separate these petals. Really make this color really thick and dark, maybe add a little bit of red to it. So we'll come down in here. Grab the water. Blend it up. I want to make sure that these colors aren't too similar right next to each other, so I'm going to make that really faded on this right edge. Or I can always go darker color right in there. For a little shadow shape. Maybe some blue, smoky blue indigo. Using that indigo color for accentuating my shadows here and there. Not too much. Just a glaze of the indigo color over the pinks that are dry. And now we'll move down in here and add our darker details, but we're not going to get too detailed on these outer rimmed petals. I want them to feel really light and transparent. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the background up into the edge of my sketch and add in dark greens on top for leaves. And this will cover up the sketch on my outer edge, but still leave these outer petals as really pale and really light. So I'm going to move down to this petal here. Starting to diffuse up here a little bit in the middle, but then also get dark right around this edge where the wave part of the petal is crashing. So we're gonna add in some dark color, wet and wet technique. And along this edge. Make this a little bit light over here. And then grab some indigo and paint over some of that edge. Maybe starting to add in some of those details on there. Now we'll go over here. This is one big petal, so we're just gonna place our main shadow color towards the center. And bring it up with water. We'll go right up against that edge. Grab more color. And drop in more shadow up at the top. A little bit of indigo. Maybe on both sides. And now this petal, this petal, this petal, and then we're just gonna let it be faded. For these bigger petals, I'm gonna use a size 6 brush. And we're gonna skip, because this is pretty wet, so we're gonna skip over to this side. Starting from the top of the petal this time, where the fold is. Fill in that shadow shape and then bring it down with clean water, but not too much water. And really fade out this edge so that it's on top of this petal. So we'll just go in on this side a little bit with darker color. Then over here. Fade it out just a little bit. Since this is a very small area, be very careful not to add any excess water. So make sure you dab all the excess you can off on your paper towel. Go in with slightly lighter mid-tone values in between here, and same thing against this one. Much lighter shadows, but we still want to show that separation. So just kind of a glaze. For some of these. And this one's curled over, so we definitely need more shadow on this one. So we'll go up through here. And add in our shadow. Then alongside that petal. And up. And then we'll do a little bit here, a little bit there. Much lighter for these, but still enough to separate. And on the top of this wave petal, we'll add some shadow as well. Now just taking as light of color as I possibly can and adding any little shadows on these outer petals. Just keeping it super minimal and transparent. Nothing too major. Petals, petals, petals. Okay. So at this stage, we're just kind of adding light color to our petals that are on the outer rim, just to make them feel a little bit more like they're a part of the flower a little bit more. I'm going to do a really pale grayish blue glaze over some of these outer petals too, to make them feel really faded. And add in that purple towards the base. Just bring it up and fade it out as much as you can with water towards the outer edge. Maybe drop in a little bit more of that pinky purple there. This is like black and Prussian blue color. That one was still a little wet, so I dropped in that faded shadow color, smoky blue. I'm just gonna lift some of it because it was a little too much. And along this edge. Don't be afraid to add in the color and be bold with the amount you put on. Oops, we'll put a leaf there, because then you can always just lift the color or fade it down to soften it. Grayish, shadowy tone, streaking in some of those detail lines, and on this one too. So this technique is called glazing. So we're adding a glaze of a color on top of something we've already painted to just add a grayish tint to it. Just a little bit more touches of this indigo glaze to tie it all together. Little touch there. Maybe a touch there. And see what happens when we add it as a little bit of a detail shadow. Just a little touch. All right, so now we're gonna frame our flower with some leaves. I'm gonna make these with my filbert brush. You can apply the same process for a detailed look to your leaves as the petals, but I think I'm just gonna do some really big, juicy sap green with green gold. And just kind of go right up against those edges of some of my petals. And paint in some more simple leaf shapes. So I'm using the corner of the brush to get those almond shapes, the top edge for a really thin stroke. And then I'll go back in using wet and wet technique with a darker green, so maybe add some blue and black. Just accentuate some of those curves. Maybe we have a stem. I love green gold. I love the pop of the yellow in green gold for these leaves, so I'm gonna do something over here. Again, being really bold. And just making sure my leaves point back to that funnel point is the main goal for placement. And then I'll come up against these petals. C curves for all my leaf shapes so that they don't come out too stiff and rigid. And then I'll place something here. You can always use your round brush to go into these details, but I'm lazy, so I'm using my filbert brush. But it would be a lot easier and quicker, but I'm stubborn and lazy. Darken it down in there. Wet and wet technique. And some up in here, but just probably 1 and 2. Let's do a little stem. I'm gonna make my stem mostly water. Use the brush on its side like this so I get that thin edge. Like share. And let's cover up that spot that mysteriously got onto my paper. Leaf shape. I'm gonna use my round brush. Finally caved. Going off the paper there. Maybe a bit more of a branch situation on that corner. Gonna drop in some blue. For some shadow. And you can keep adding in your leaves to make it feel like it's on a bush. I think that would look really pretty actually. But for framing purposes, I'm going to add one more leaf in this little crack. A little bit more before I start adding in the leaf shapes. Okay. Sap green and green gold. Do not fear making those marks. The blue. And there you go, a fun, fluffy, semi-realistic watercolor peony where we broke down all of the steps for sketching, all of the steps for wet and wet and wet and dry. And there it is. Hope you had fun. Again, this was an adaptation of the cover art on my second book, Everyday Watercolor Flowers. If you want to learn more about flowers, make sure you check this book out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this series on our fluffy, juicy, detailed peony. This was so much fun for me to paint. I know that once you try this, maybe you won't be happy with your first time results, so keep at it. It does take a lot of practice and muscle memory, just like anything, but at least you have now a grasp on how to break things down and simplify them so that you don't just look at a blank sheet of paper and try and wing it. Because every time we just try and wing a sketch like that or a painting like that that's a little bit more detailed, it always comes out a little wonky. So simplify it. Start with your basic shapes, go back through parts 1, 2, and 3, and make sure you really grasp these techniques. And then I would love to hear about your favorite part of this week's video in the comments below. Thanks so much for subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, downloading our freebies, joining our courses. That is what makes the world of Jenna Rainey LLC go around, and how I'm able to provide more educational videos here on YouTube and more in-depth educational videos in my online courses, like my Everyday Watercolor Companion course, which is under $100 course that is packed with value, 8.5 hours of video content inside that course, and tons of rave reviews. So I hope you go check those out. And next month, we are gonna be painting the cover art of my third book, Everyday Watercolor Seashores, which also comes out March 5th, 2024. So we're celebrating the release of my next book during the whole month of March with a detailed explanation every single week of breaking down the process of painting the cover art of my third book, which is a beautiful, detailed, zoomed in ocean scene. So I hope you get excited, get ready, and I'll see you in the next video.